Hi, so I'm Alicia. I'm a creative conservationist, originally from North Yorkshire and now based in Bristol, and I really love curlews. I decided to make this film maybe about a year and a half ago, probably 2 years by the time I finished editing this, and I decided to make it because I've always had a connection with curlews.
When we first moved into our house, one of the first things that flew over our house was a curlew. And I feel like I've always had such a connection with these birds, but I actually feel like I don't know that much about them.
I've been really lucky to see them all of my life, but lots of people haven't. And they have an amazing song which is just really whooping and sort of curling, and it's beautiful. But so many people haven't heard it. And I wanted to create a film which really raised awareness of curlews because they're a red listed species who are declining, but many of our wading birds are.
So curlews can be used as one of those flagship species.
And if more people know about curlews and care about this really charismatic bird, then more people will hopefully start protecting some of our other waders, moorland birds, wetland birds, which are also declining. So yeah, this film is for that really. It was just a little bit of fun, and it was a lot of fun to be honest. I filmed it with my friend Claire. We went and filmed some curlews, and that was wicked. We also filmed them with my dad. We'd come back from the moors having filmed curlews for a day, and our ears would just be ringing with the sound of their call. It's just such a beautiful, emotive sound, and it resonates with so many people.
A friend of mine, Lee Weston, who runs Hilltop Farm in Yorkshire, she said to me once that one of the things that make curlews so special is that everyone's relationship with curlews is slightly different. So for her, they're a meadow bird, but for somebody else, they're a wintering bird. Somebody else, they're a moorland bird. So everyone has that really personal connection with those curlews.
It was probably August 2013 on a wash wader rigging group.
I think for me, obviously the song.
I literally didn't know what any of them were. So I was like looking at them like, what is this giant thing with a weird beak?
But I think actually what keeps me hooked on it is the connections that other people have.
And not many people know that Curlew have a courtship display, but they do. So it's very reminiscent of dad dancing.
And I think that's really special, having this sort of identifier, which is such a big thing for a species. Having that call is such a big thing.
I think it's kind of strengthened by the fact that curlews are really, really sight faithful. So quite often if you're sticking around the same place, you might be hearing the same birds coming back, which is really, really lovely. And if your family have stayed in that place, you might be hearing descendants of the birds that your grandparents listened to. And I think it's a really nice way of connecting with the land in a very personal way. It's lovely.
The local farmers talk about the fact that, they kind of use the curlew's sort of call as the herald of, spring, again, in addition to lambing, obviously. But there's so many fewer than there used to be. Even like in the last 10 years since I moved here, there were a couple of pairs around the family cottage, and there just aren't anymore. And fields where they used to breed in have been, intensified, converted to ryegrass, silage ryegrass and stuff like that. And that's kind of quite symptomatic of the changes to the landscape that are pretty much causing curlews to decline.
In the UK, we have two species of curlews, the Wimbrel and the Eurasian curlew.
Curlews obviously have a big beak. I remember sometimes when you'd see them on the moors, you'd think that they were owls because they're so big. They just, they're huge. I think that really surprises people. They're bigger than a toaster, if that helps for size context.
You can see them in a lot of different settings. So you can see them during the winter on mud flats and estuaries when they're busy feeding, but there's nothing like seeing a curlew on the breeding grounds in some beautiful grasslands, meadow habitats, surrounded by wildflowers, particularly when they're guarding their chicks. Their chicks are tiny little balls of fluff, really, really cute. And the parents are generally wonderful. They will chase away everything: crows, ravens, red kites, even sheep and cattle. And I just love their persistence and their dedication to looking after their really beautiful little chicks. So yeah, that's probably the thing I like most about Curlew. It's just they're really fantastic parents.
Talking to people, I was really hoping it would be really optimistic. And actually, it's one of those things that it was surprising because it's not always just really positive and happy, but it can be. Like in pockets, there are going to be curlews.
So I think there's a huge cultural aspect to why these birds are so special, and they also, this was my first job in conservation, and it was a bit of a baptism of fire. Because curlews are caught in the crossfire of so many of the big debates that we have in the UK, from grouse moors, predator control, intensive farming, forestry, recreational disturbance. Curlews are impacted by all of them. So by trying to work to protect curlews, I've had to learn so much about just general British conservation.
Curlew chicks have a much higher rate of survival, or in grassland areas, with a mixture of vegetation heights. So curlew, when they're just hatched, they will use short vegetation for foraging and tall vegetation for hiding. They can increase their chances of survival by 3 times if they breed in those sort of grasslands.
I think there's so many different things that curlews are tackling. I think our landscape has changed quite rapidly in a short period of time, and because curlews are ground nesting birds, and because their chicks spend a long time on the ground, they are particularly vulnerable to those big changes, the intensification of agriculture, and we've obviously got a lot of generalist predators as well, so they are very susceptible to these changes.
But our food production system is just totally unsuited to supporting them currently. Everybody has a part to play. And, because people ask, oh, is there something that I can do? And they're thinking, participate in Curlew surveys or something like that. I was like, make smart food choices.
Wow.
I guess as an artist, I think seeing how other media can be used to engage people in species conservation and raising awareness, that's really exciting. So I spoke to Jasmine Canham, who worked on the Curlew Head Starter project in 2022. And this involved her going out and using a big aerial to track where curlews were. And she also witnessed the release of some of the baby curlews that were being reared from eggs and released back into the wild. And that was a really exciting project to hear more about and to really understand Jasmine's experience with curlews and curlew conservation, practical conservation that's on the ground.
Each radio tag has its own unique frequency, and all of the frequencies are pre-programmed into the kind of radio unit. So what I do is I'm walking around the site, kind of switching between these radio frequencies, trying to see if I can pick up a frequency. And you can tell when there's one within your kind of 200 metre distance, because it starts beeping at you. I'm going through the same radio frequencies every time, so I know the radio frequencies off by heart. I start to recognise that I see the same ones when I go and visit sometimes. And there was one particular field on one of the sites where the 2 same birds liked to hang out together in that one field, and I saw them a couple of times in this same patch, and you kind of get to know them a bit.
So for hatching success, predator exclusion fencing has been shown to boost hatching success by at least 2 times in other waders species. And so for Curlew, it is starting to be deployed across the country, but this year we're going to be trialling that tool specifically in Breckland and a couple of other study areas. And if we target that fencing in areas where vegetation has been managed so that there are areas of short and areas of tall vegetation, then as well as boosting hatching success, we should also be able to increase the Curlew's chicks' chances of survival as well. So a combination of fencing and vegetation management probably the key, or at least something we're going to trial and will hopefully work.
One of the things that a lot of Curlew conservationists and researchers really disheartened is that, we can only do so much. We can say why they're declining, we can monitor their declines, but ultimately agri-environment schemes aren't going to be enough if you want to conserve curlews and breeding waders in the wider landscape. I mean, there might be some individuals or species which are more able to be conserved in the wider countryside, like maybe lapwing. But curlews roam over such a wide area, and they're so susceptible and vulnerable to habitat change.
What would you like the kind of future of curlew conservation to look like?
Well, I'd like more curlew for a start. if we can arrange that.
I'm optimistic about the future of curlew conservation in the short term because there are so many fantastic projects in the UK and also in Europe with so many dedicated volunteers and employees who are every single season doing their absolute best to boost the breeding productivity of curlew, both in the lowlands and in the uplands. I'm positive about that, but I am less positive about the longer term future of curlew unless we see radical changes in the way that our countryside is run.
Even if they are able to sort of raise their chicks because the nests don't get eaten, the chicks have nowhere to feed and forage. It's just, a really heavily farmed landscape. And it's no wonder when you see that comparison and have it really brought home to you. It's like, no wonder sort of breeding ground nesting birds, waders can't survive in this landscape anymore.
I think if you don't have hope for the curlew, it's really a very worrying message for a lot of other less charismatic species that don't have that kind of huge social backing. So I think I have to be hopeful for the curlews, even though there's definitely moments where it feels like because it's so complex and there are so many different issues at play here. And I think, other people who've worked in curlew conservation as well have had those moments where it's like, wow, this is almost too big. But then you start the breeding season again, and no matter how poorly the last breeding season might have went, there's always this feeling of hope and optimism, because I think the idea of giving up is, you can't comprehend it, because you're like, I don't want to let that go, and I don't want to let that call fall silent on our watch when it's connected so many generations to that land, and then it's on our watch that it falls silent. It just, I'm not prepared to accept it.
So I guess, what have I learned while doing this? We're doing this funny little film. I've learned a lot about curlews, which is good. Speaking to experts, speaking to scientists and everyone else, I've learned so much about them. I think as well, I've also learned about kind of my own connection with this bird. I think working on this film, it's really brought that home. For me, it is very much a bird of my childhood, and a bird which is entwined with my identity. And the idea of losing that ability for other people to connect with the landscapes around them, to have that sort of first experience of the natural world, for that to be lost forever, for that to fall silent from these beautiful songstresses would be such a tragedy. So I think I feel very motivated to keep on fighting the good fight along with all of these other amazing people, and do everything I can to help ensure that this amazing bird is here for future generations to enjoy.